This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Ghannam.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, we are witnessing a major historical moment in the history of U.S. politics and democracy. As we speak now, university campuses all over the United States and globally are on fire, literally on fire and figuratively on fire, as we're seeing the largest protest movement since the 1960s anti-Vietnam War protests and the protests against apartheid South Africa in the 80s. We are witnessing campuses kind of rising up, condemning the war in Gaza, condemning the apartheid state of Israel, and condemning the U.S. complicity in supporting Israel in their genocide in Gaza. We're going to be covering that in a very powerful way today. And in addition to that, we're going to be talking about Biden's reaction to the student demonstrators. We're going to talk about Netanyahu's message urging for a crackdown. Listen, a foreign politician calling for a crackdown on American universities, really outrageous. We're going to talk about the student demands. We're also going to talk about media and politicians conflating calls to end the genocide and divestment from Israel with the classic anti-Semitism trope. And we're going to talk about, which has been a big topic here, the ongoing effort for Biden to get reelected and the impact of these protests on campuses for his reelection. You know, Jamal, I've been going to some of the protest movements here in the San Francisco Bay Area, at Berkeley, at San Francisco State, at USF, and the movements have been so impressive. They started in Columbia, your alma mater, with profound protest movement in Columbia. And unfortunately, despite what the faculty have said, the president, Manoush Shafiq, decided to call in the NYPD and crack down, arrest, and physically assault students to crack down on the Columbia protests. They haven't backed down. More importantly, at UCLA, where there were hundreds of pro-Palestine activists in an encampment, the UCLA community of leadership with the chancellor and the university leadership allowed, and this is really interesting, Jamal, they allowed what they called counter-protesters, which were really pro-Israel, pro-Zionist thugs and outside agitators and neo-Nazis and white supremacists to come in and assault pro-Palestinian activists. And in some cases, Jamal, at UCLA, one pro-Palestine student was shot in the cheek with a rubber bullet. Others were physically assaulted. It was really profoundly disturbing. And the LAPD just stopped, didn't do anything, and let it happen. So we're seeing campuses on fire, and it's a really amazing historical moment.
Well, you're right. Just as you mentioned, commencement ceremonies began at colleges and universities across the U.S. this weekend, while administrators continue to grapple with major protests on campus. Demands vary, but most of the demonstrators are calling for their schools to divest from companies and other entities that they say support or benefit from Israel's war in Gaza. Pro-Palestinian student protests on and in front of George Washington University's continue on university with no sign of slowing down. Most protesters, a mix of students from GW and Georgetown Universities, had set up an encampment around what is referred to the university yard, but later on had moved on to the street and surrounding area, taking their bags and tents with them after university workers put up metal fencing around the university yard. As for the encampment itself, GW University had wanted it cleared and requested DC police assistance, but according to reporting by the Washington Post, officials rejected the request. At least that's what I know for now. The university announced that multiple students will face disciplinary action. So, Arab Talks reporter in Washington, D.C., Phil Pasquini, spoke to several students on campus. But before we go to the interviews, Let's hear what one of the activists was saying to the crowds.
Right? I want to emphasize that these are students. These are 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds. These are students. Yet we are still having these students being treated like monsters or like villains. And unfortunately, when it comes to the Palestinian liberation movement, this is not new. This is not new. We are used to this. And we have heard consistently, well, how is everyone so prepared? How do they have all these supplies? Because this has been ongoing for 76 years. These SJPs are not new to administrative repression or Zionist brutality or doxing or Zionist assaults or police brutality. That is an everyday thing for these students who are part of these organizations. So they know what's up and they know how to keep themselves, and we're here to keep them safe because they know how to keep themselves safe, right? So I want everybody here today to leave feeling more empowered than you came in. I can tell you again, as somebody who has been here day and night, every single day, and has barely slept, that the power of these students is goddamn scary. It is terrible. And so everyone should be scared. These Zionists should be scared. These congressmen should be scared. This administration should be scared. They should be scared. We have seen the brutality that has been coming out from other universities. And it is incredibly, incredibly heartbreaking and gut-wrenching. But as Palestinians, we know what this is like. We know what this is like. We know what it is like for Zionists to come into your space and assault you and brutalize you while the police just watch and encourage it. We know what this is like. But with that being said, every single one of you who's showing up here today is protecting our students. And you deserve to embody that and to feel that and to know just how powerful and scary it is to these higher ups. They're terrified, and they should be. And we will continue to be here until all of Palestine is free, until the charges are dropped against every pro-Palestine student organizer at every single one of these universities, until they divest from the Zionist state of Israel, until they protect pro-Palestine speech, and until they ensure that there is no more repression of these pro-Palestine student organizers. Thank you.
Arab Talks reporter in Washington, D.C., Phil Pasquini, spoke to these students. Some of them were George Washington University students, and others were students at Georgetown University who came to GW to show support. This is Leela, a student at Georgetown University. She is Jewish and stands in solidarity with Palestinians.
I think across universities in the DC area and also across universities all across the country, this is an issue students are really, really passionate about because, I mean, we are over 200 days into a genocide. Tens of thousands of individuals have been killed in horrific ways. And all of our universities, as part of this consortium that's taking part in this encampment, including Georgetown, GW, American, Howard, and Gallaudet, have investments in corporations that are helping to facilitate this ongoing genocide. So we see it as absolutely essential that we are here for as long as possible until our universities divest from genocide.
How do you think universities should respond besides divesting? Should they come out and make a statement about them being against or for what's going on between Israel and Palestine at this point? Or have they, has your university spoken out? It's a Catholic school. And
yeah, so Georgetown has called for a ceasefire pretty recently. Most universities have it. And I think if we look at Gaza right now, there are no universities left standing. If this had happened anywhere else in the world, I'm sure all of our academic institutions would be up in arms about it. But because of the immense dehumanization and racism towards the Palestinian people, we do not see the same level of care or attention, and universities are perfectly fine staying complicit in this genocide. So I think that's why it's so important we have active student organizing on every single university across the country right now. think students absolutely have the right to protest, and we are seeing horrific forms of force and violence against students who are peacefully protesting at universities they pay tuition to attend. Administrations are calling the police on their own students for exercising their First Amendment rights and oftentimes applying what they learned inside the classroom into movements that are going on outside of the classroom. So I think it's GW University, they called the police on us. They tried to get us shut down the first day. They tried to have the police all drag us out, and we're still here, and we're still here even stronger. And our encampment keeps growing every single day. And so despite attempts at repression by our universities and by the state, we are committed to standing with the people in Gaza who have been going through a genocide for over 200 days. And we are committed to fighting for divestment for as long as possible.
Some people in Congress, some congressmen and women have purportedly stated that anybody involved in any of these actions who are not American citizens and foreign students should be deported immediately for their participation. What are your thoughts on this type of reaction?
That's absolutely ridiculous. Like, not even to say, of course, like, people have the right to peacefully protest, to express their speech, to stand up for what they believe in. But also, we should not be criminalizing people for opposing genocide. People are more upset about protests against genocide than the actual genocide that's happening. Why do you care more about some tent set up in a lawn than the videos and the images coming out of Gaza of children being torn limb from limb, of doctors and health professionals in their scrubs with their hands zip-tied behind their back, of tent camps right now at Rafah is being bombarded. There are over 1 million people who were displaced by the Zionist entity who are sheltering in tents and who are being bombarded. That is where our focus should be, not here. And I don't understand why people are more upset about some protest than what we're actually protesting against. We should be encouraging our students to speak out about what's going on in the world. We go to college to get educated, to then use that education for something good. But right now our universities are showing they care more about repressing free speech than actually ending their complicity in genocide.
We also spoke to Mu'taz Salim, a Palestinian American from Gaza and a graduate student at GW.
I have family in Gaza. I've lost a lot of family members of mine in Gaza, and also, generally speaking, have been witnessing the horrors that the Zionist Israeli regime has caused on Gaza, such as, relentless bombing to this very moment, mass graves being uncovered, and there's so many more. And I really felt the strength in the movement currently, seeing a movement that's so uncompromisingly committed to Palestinian liberation. I also really align with the demands of the students, which I'm not affiliated with any of the organizers here. I just am another student at the university. So their demand for divestment from Israeli companies aiding Israel in their genocide, tech and weapons companies, amnesty for the pro-Palestine organizers, ensuring that all accounts are disclosed, endowments and investments, protecting Black and brown folk, and ending all partnerships with Israeli institutions. I mean, as far as I'm aware, the university response has mostly been negative. I know that there was a request for arrest done after the first night that the MPD declined. Outside of that, there's been a lot of intimidation from police. There have been students who have been suspended for being in the encampment, threat of suspensions for others who were also in the encampment. For the most part, I mean, it seems like we've seen in other universities around the country, they always talk about free speech and the First Amendment and whatnot, but it's clear that if the free speech is not endorsed or aligned with what the state wants, they crack down on it hard. And so literally the reason we've been so repressed and cracked down on and intimidated is just because we're so uncompromising in our demand, not only our practical demands of divestment, of amnesty, but also the liberation of Palestine. I will continue to try in Congress to appeal to the system that is in place, where we're supposed to have our voices heard and make our message clear as the people that we want an end to the genocide and the liberation of Palestine. But it's clear after they sent, another $14 billion in money for weapons to Israel that we need to take the stand on our own as the people, as the students, as the community. There's a clear disconnect, I think, between the people and the sort of the institutions that hold the power, whether it be Congress, whether it be the mainstream media in particular, outlets like CNN, New York Times. I think, personally speaking, I think they're all compromised in the sense that they receive funding from Zionist donors and other Zionist entities, and they have a lot of relationships with them too. And another thing I'll mention is I also don't want to give too much power to the pro-Israel lobby, because it's clear that the US as a state fully backs this imperial settler colonial project. It is inherent to its values to continue to support it. Biden said it himself. If there wasn't an Israel, we would make one. Something that's not an exact quote, but it was along those lines. And I think this is what the state wants. They want an Israeli regime to continue to be there to oppress the Palestinians because they have their own interests vested in it. If the encampment is removed or they attempt to remove it, there are, I'll speak just for myself. I personally, you're gonna have to drag me out of here for me to leave the encampment. And I think we've seen in a lot of universities where the cops have come in and shut it down, the next day they come back and rebuild it. And so that is a clear indication of the unwavering commitment to the practical demands of divestment, of amnesty for organizers, for Palestine, for the protection of Black and brown students, ending partnerships with any Israeli institutions. At the same time, I think at its core, everyone is so deeply committed to the cause of Palestinian liberation, to that struggle, because they've seen, we started off with ceasefire because people were like, okay, this is a genocide, we have to end it. But after seeing just how many systems of power have been continuously giving a green light to the Israeli state to proceed with what they're doing, I think they've woken up to the even bigger ideal, to the movement, which is, this is we're in a peak moment right now, but this is a long movement that's existed for decades and will continue to, it's a marathon. And I think we have people now who are really waking up, not just to this moment, but also to the whole movement, and unwaveringly committed to Palestinian liberation.
Then Phil Pasquini interviewed this JVP member, a student at Georgetown University.
Our demands are to protect pro-Palestinian speech on campus, to drop all charges against pro-Palestinian organizers and organizations, to disclose all investments and endowments, to divest from the State of Israel, and end all academic partnerships with the State of Israel. So, on day one, we came here with the purpose of we're staying here until our demands are met, and that hasn't changed. On day 8, we're still going to be here however long it takes for our demands to be met.
Now, Georgetown University uses the rubric that there exists to make the world a better place. Do you think this is in their foremost thoughts at this point, or is this something ancillary to it?
These values should really teach us that fighting against genocide is the university's responsibility. And right now, Georgetown invests millions of dollars in Alphabet and Amazon, two corporations that are engaged in contracts with Israel, providing cloud technologies and military support, technologies that are being used to unlawfully surveil Palestinians. We're here for Palestinian liberation. We're here because after 200 days of genocide and 76 years of military occupation, we're fed up and we want to see an end to this quickly. We are here, we are steadfast, we are principled, and we are going to be here at this encampment until our demands are met. Students are fed up at this point. We are sick of seeing our country not just being complicit in genocide, but actively facilitating a genocide. And we know that we can't trust politicians to liberate us, and we have to liberate ourselves. And so that's what we're here to do, is to take back, reclaim our power, and work towards liberation.
I see from your necklace that you're Jewish, and you said that you were with JWP, Jewish Voice for Peace.
Yeah.
What is your reflection on that?
Partly, I'm guided by my Jewish identity to be working in this movement. I grew up with the idea of tikkun olam, to heal the world, and the idea that we're all made in the image of God. And, my people have a extensive history of fighting oppression and fighting for liberation. And I feel proud to be Jewish here. I feel safe to be Jewish here because everyone around me also believes in that same idea of collective liberation for us all.
Is that generally the feeling for most Jewish students that are involved with liberation of Palestine?
Yeah, we have a lot of Jewish organizers, and I think that I can only speak for myself, but the way I've been feeling is just that these claims of anti-Semitism are a diversion tactic meant to take the focus away from the genocide that's going on in Gaza. And so I think it's important to emphasize that Jews are not a monolith and that everyone here believes in collective liberation, and I'm included in that as well.
Wow, that's really great reporting by Arab Talk reporter in Washington, D.C., Phil Pasquini. Jamal, the reporting and the statements from students are truly amazing. This represents a kind of cross-section of students at George Washington, but it also represents globally what we're seeing in universities and campuses across the United States, across North Africa, and globally right now. And I just want to say, because I'm kind of more plugged into the University of California system in California, where we have 10 campuses. The crackdown has been very significant at UCLA. Yesterday, and this is kind of somewhat breaking news, we heard that protesters at the University of California, San Diego, police were called by the chancellor. And in addition to the police being called and people arrested, the chancellor had the audacity to call ICE. Thinking that, again, outside agitators is the new phrase that is being thrown around by politicians, by university officials. They're really freaking out, Jamal. They're freaking out that this is the largest collection of student protests since the anti-Vietnam War era, and since South Africa anti-apartheid protests of the 1980s. And frankly, Jamal, it looks like Biden and his poll numbers continue to plummet in relation to his inability to really articulate, the messaging and be able to connect to the messaging that the students are demanding. It appears that he may be making exactly the same mistake that was made in the 1960s, with Lyndon B. Johnson and Richard Nixon, and the 1980s with Ronald Reagan. I mean, we're seeing politicians fail again, brutally fail in their ability to completely understand what the demands of the students are asking. And I think Biden's in trouble.
Well, this is what he said. Order must prevail. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduation. None of this is a peaceful protest. Threatening people, intimidating people, instilling fear in people is not a peaceful protest. Now I want to ask you, who is intimidating who?
Well, that's easy, Jamal. When we look at what the police did to the protesters, it's the police that are intimidating. If we look at UCLA, Jamal, this is really important because UCLA is now being investigated by civil rights and the DOJ departments within the government for their brutal attack by outsiders on the pro-Palestine movement. I mean, the violence is coming from pro-Israel defenders, Jamal. And when you look at the video from UCLA, it's rather stunning. They have identified neo-Nazis. They even identified, Jamal, this is the most outrageous thing. They identified Israelis in IDF uniforms.
Right.
Attack. Check this out. It's the United States. It's Los Angeles. They had IDF soldiers in IDF uniforms, part of the so-called counter-protesters that were beating up on pro-Palestine activists, beating up on students. They were not students. So I think Joe Biden has it wrong. The media, again, has it wrong. Instead of labeling these what so-called counter-protesters as thugs, as white supremacists, as pro-Israel provocateurs. They're calling them counter-protesters, which is a disservice to the reality of what's happening on the ground. And I think you're right, Jamal. The real provocateurs, the real antagonists are the people who are trying to shut down what the students are demanding.
Well, I mean, we can go to the real provocateur when you have a foreign country, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu,
Exactly.
lecturing Americans, lecturing students, and lecturing administrations how to behave, how to deal with these basically protesters. I mean, imagine that, and chastising basically the reaction by universities, calling these universities a hotbed for terrorism, a hotbed for Hamas supporters, and things like this.
Well, Jamal, I think your point is very well taken. We had Tom Cotton, a U.S. senator, and a lot of Congress people coming out and calling the protesters and the encampments little Gazas. Little Gazas. The outrageousness of these senators and these Congress people kind of using the threat and the specter of anti-Semitism to shut down these protests, these legitimate protests, which is within our long democratic tradition from Vietnam, from the civil rights movement, from the anti-apartheid era, of voicing our concerns against the brutality of the war. And the war is brutal. And then you have Benjamin Netanyahu, who is committing a genocide, Jamal, who is committing massacres on top of a genocide, lecturing politicians in the United States and students on how to crack down. Well, it seems like the Chancellor, Minouche Shafik, and the Chancellor at UCLA, Chancellor Block, are listening to Benjamin Netanyahu because they called in the militarized response. They brutally attacked protesters, or in the UCLA case, Jamal, they let these thuggish counter-protesters who are, basically Israeli citizens and IDF members attack students. So apparently they're listening to Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, I liked what Senator Sanders' response to Netanyahu, basically saying, please do not insult the intelligence of the American people by attempting to distract us from the immoral and illegal war policies of your extremist and racist government. Do not use anti-Semitism to deflect attention from the criminal indictment you are facing in the Israeli courts, and are not anti-Semitic to hold you accountable for your actions. I mean, I think this was the most powerful response, because the rest of the apologists in the Senate and Congress, as you've mentioned, they've been attacking the students. They've been going to campuses and trying to harass them. You had, you've mentioned
Mike Johnson
Mike
going
Johnson,
to Columbia, that's right.
Yes, House Speaker Mike Johnson. He was booed when he went. I mean, if he thinks that he was doing something, and they booed him, he faced boos and loud chants when he went there to deliver a speech. He thinks like he can just waltz right there and lecture the students, and then he was. On top of it, not that I mind, he was calling for the university president Minouche Shafik to resign. So what Minouche Shafik was doing was not enough. It was not enough for him that she called the NYPD to arrest the students. It was not enough for him that they're suspending the students. It's not enough for him that actually Columbia has canceled its graduation ceremony. So he wanted, I don't know what else did he want, like you've mentioned. They claim, that's why when you mention ICE, this is very important to distinguish between sending in LA the LAPD or in San Francisco SFPD, or in New York NYPD, to send ICE, because what you're saying that the instigators are foreign students. Do you know the percentage of foreign students at Columbia University, or do you know the percentage at these college campuses, or the percentage of those who are partaking in these demonstrations? Very little. This is just.
But it doesn't matter. I know,
but this is again to try to by doing that, I mean, you're sending ICE against who? You're sending ICE against American citizens, be it Palestinian Americans, Jewish Americans from Jewish Voice for Peace, brown people, African Americans, and then you're saying we're sending ICE. ICE is like, we're going to deport you as if you are an illegal criminal that came to this country.
But Jamal, that's exactly where it's headed. And you and I know this. After 9/11, we know that there were attempts to try to strip American citizens of their constitutional rights, strip them of their citizenship, and try to deport them. And I think we're seeing the Biden administration, together with the kind of extreme white supremacist movement within our government, mostly Republicans, kind of ramping up the rhetoric. We're hearing it from the presumptive nominee of the Republican Party, Donald Trump, ramping up the rhetoric that these are foreign agitators. And it's an attempt, Jamal, to fragment, if you will, this global anti-war, anti-genocide movement. And, if we take a step back, Jamal, and we look at what the student demands are, it makes it even more bizarre. The students are saying genocide is bad. We should not commit genocide against the civilian population. They're saying ceasefire now. They're saying divest, boycott, and sanction the apartheid state of Israel for its crimes against humanity. These are not outrageous demands. They're not that different. In fact, they're almost virtually the same as what they said against apartheid South Africa. That's the same kind of demands that the anti-war movement in Vietnam said.
Stop doing business with military weapons manufacturers that are supplying arms to Israel. Stop accepting research money from Israel, which, by the way, we give Israel the money, then it comes back for projects that aid Israel's that aids basically the research country's military efforts. Stop investing college endowments with money managers who profit from Israeli companies or contractors. These are the demands. I looked at the demands. I looked at them over and over and over again, and they make them sound like as if they want to, commit terrorism in this country. Like when they say, oh, they're getting their talking points from Hamas, and I'm like, what? I don't think so.
Well, Jamal, this gets back to the old Israeli playbook, the APAC playbook, the ADL playbook, the Jonathan Luntz playbook, who is the pollster for APAC and for right-wing extremists, and they basically are using this old playbook, Jamal. And the playbook is, if you criticize Israel and its policies, you're anti-Semitic. If you call for a ceasefire, you're anti-Semitic. It is an absolutely kind of degenerate and depraved kind of analysis, and it's wearing thin. People are not buying this kind of analysis that if we criticize an apartheid state, if we criticize war profiteering, if we criticize the United States for supporting, aiding, and abetting a genocide, we're somehow anti-Semitic. It's the furthest thing from anti-Semitism. And of course, Jamal, the obvious fact that large numbers of student protesters happen to be Jewish too. We saw it in the Phil Pasquini interviews from GW. We have interviews from every single campus. When we talk to the student protesters, large numbers are actually Jewish American students who are condemning the genocide and the massacres of innocent Palestinian civilians. So this old thing, Jamal, of somehow you're anti-Semitic if you criticize Israel is wearing thin. But the Congress decided to pass the bill, almost unanimously, which they never do, basically codifying the IHRA definition that basically supports the idea that if you criticize Israel, you're being anti-Semitic. So they're freaking out, Jamal, because they don't know what to do, because these protests are sweeping the country, and they're not going away. Despite the arrest, Jamal, they're not going away.
Well, these protests also, not only sweeping the country, but they're opening the eyes of people who are standing on the fence, who really don't know what's happening in Palestine, who really don't know the billions of dollars that these universities invest in the Israeli military and other industries there. I mean, as if we lack companies. I mean, when you talk about like, Columbia University investing in Israel, when you have Wall Street is only 5 miles down the road, and then they have to go and put the retirement funds, the endowment funds in Israeli companies. And most people, I tell you, they don't know that. Most students don't know that. And when you're talking about freaking out, there is, of course, the image calling, Israel an apartheid state, calling Israel is a genocidal state. But the other thing, this could cost Israel billions of dollars, and that's what is freaking out Benjamin Netanyahu.
Right.
I mean, I think this is the most important part of these demonstrations. Of course, for the time being, these demonstrations are very important to stop the slaughter, which, by the way, as we're talking, Israel is now going into Rafah. They've already attacked and took control of the Rafah crossing border with
Right.
Egypt. But the long-lasting message is the boycott and divestment movement, which is now at least focusing on U.S. campuses. But this is a bigger issue, which is really amounts to billions and billions of dollars.
Well, I think that's exactly right, Jamal. And just to kind of get to the last part of our discussion today, this is Joe Biden's Vietnam. He's blowing it, and he'll continue to blow it. Joe Biden basically condemned the protesters, despite saying, well, he values, free speech and the value of protest. But Joe Biden and the Biden administration is doing the same thing that the right-wing extremists are saying. They're basically saying, yeah, you could protest, except don't criticize Israel. And we support the crackdown. Basically, that's what they're doing. And if you look at Joe Biden's poll numbers, Jamal, guess what? Worse. They're getting worse and worse and worse. In fact, Joe Biden has the lowest poll numbers of any president at this time prior to a major election, basically going back 40 or 50 years. I mean, he's in deep trouble. And there's nothing Joe Biden can do to salvage his moral depravity and the Biden administration's moral lapses and what they're doing right now by continuing to support the genocide in Palestine. There's nothing they can do. They've basically blown it, Jamal. And Joe Biden has this other problem. The economy is tanking too. He continues to send billions of dollars to support the war in, supporting the war efforts of the apartheid state of Israel. Billions, $26 billion in addition to the other billions. And now he's all surprised that people don't want to vote for him. African Americans are not interested in voting. Young people, students are not interested in voting. So I think Joe Biden is in trouble, Jamal.
Well, let's go by some of the polls that you've mentioned. A recent CNN poll showed that a staggering 81% of voters younger than 35 disapprove of Biden's handling of Israel's war on Gaza. Also, Biden's approval rating stands at 28% among voters under age 30, according to a Pew Research Center survey released just last week. So you just have two polls to show you. And I think they are also now panicking, and I feel they don't know what they're doing, frankly, because at one point they're trying to appease to those people who support Israel, and Joe Biden keeps sending weapons and bombs no matter what. They're now sitting on reviewing what Hamas counteroffer and prolonging the war, basically maintaining Netanyahu on his throne in Israel, because the longer the war, that's his intentions, and they're helping him to do that, and at the same time criticizing him, or mildly criticizing him. And he's been sending feelers and delegates everywhere to try to connect with young people. They sent Vice President Harris to Michigan. They send her other places to talk to students. And at the same time, you're criticizing the students and you are accusing them of being demonstrating.
Jamal, it's not going to work. It's not working, man. It's not working. The student protest movement is just getting stronger. And if the Biden administration believes that reproductive rights and their stand on that is enough to get people to vote, the polling numbers don't support that. 28%, popularity rating, Jamal, for a sitting president before their next election is unheard of. I think when a year from now, when we're doing Arab Talk and we're talking about President Donald Trump, we're going to have no one else to blame but the Democrats, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, for bringing us Donald Trump. They would rather protect an apartheid state, Jamal. They would rather protect a genocide. They would rather protect a massacre of Palestinian civilians than win an election. So bring it on.
The sad news, when you say they, it is bipartisan, with the exception of a few brave congressmen, congresswomen who say no. But in general, I mean, we know the Republicans and the Republicans, talking about the Republicans, recently sent a letter to the ICC threatening the ICC. I don't know if you saw that letter.
Right. Yeah.
They're threatening the ICC with consequences if they basically issue warrants to arrest Israeli leaders. Here is the United States. I mean, this is what the ICC job. The ICC is doing its work. It did that in Kosovo and other instances and whatever. But then you have our Senate writing a letter to the judges, basically telling them, threatening them and threatening their families. People should read that letter very carefully.
No, I think they should read the ICC president's response, Jamal, because the ICC's response was really brilliant. They said, quit threatening judges, quit threatening international law, quit threatening international order and an attempt to hold people accountable. The ICC response was actually rather brilliant, and they're pushing back. And we can expect that these warrants are going to be issued probably this week or next week.
Well, I'm not going to hold my breath on this, because I feel there is a lot of pressure on the ICC. And there is also a pressure on the ICC from Germany, not as blatant as what we're seeing here from the Senate, and they happen to be in Europe. So we'll have to wait and see.
We'll see.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest shows, and we'll talk to you next week.
We'll see you next week.